Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing another movie review. This movie is a horror film from Turkey, English language, released in the year 2017, directed by Kaan Evrenol, and this film is called Housewife. So Housewife is about this woman. She's had a very traumatic past in her childhood, therefore had a very negative effect on her adult life. She has a very successful life, she has a husband, but she can't enjoy this life that she's living because of the inner demons. And so one day, inexplicably, one of her friends that she hasn't seen in 2 years has returned into her life. And the reason why she disappeared from her life is because she fell in with a cult that is led by a very charismatic leader who has the ability to delve into people's psyches and actually force people to deal with their past traumas in order to move on and make a better life for themselves. And so this friend is here in town because an exhibition is being held by this cult leader who's going to try and convince people who doubt him that he has what it takes. And so reluctantly, this main character goes to this exhibition, she becomes involved with this cult leader, and immediately she feels better. And so she believes that maybe there's some truth behind this, but the husband is very skeptical. He sees him as a fraud. But the further she involves herself with the cult leader, the more this main character starts to believe that something sinister is going on, and that maybe she's past the point of no return, and not only is her nightmare going to continue, but it's going to go down and get even worse. And so whether or not that is the case is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now, my thoughts on Housewife. I was actually very excited to see this film. Now, Kaan Evrenol, he really exploded Turkish horror on the world map. Now, Turkish horror has been around for quite a while, but it's been very localised. And so if you're not in Turkey, you really haven't seen too many of these films, well, for me anyway. But when Baskin come along, it really showed the world what Turkish horror was all about. That was a very nightmarish film. I actually really enjoyed that movie. It wasn't a perfect film, but I actually thought it was worth watching because it's something a little bit different. It actually reminded me of Panos Cosmatos' film Mandy, in that it was just a really nightmarish atmosphere, and that nightmarish atmosphere creates something of a different dimension, and it was something that really enticed the viewer to keep watching. And so I think that Baskin really deserved all the praise it got. And so coming into Housewife, I was hoping that it could be an equally as impressive film, but I had my hesitations based on the fact that it was a follow-up movie. Now, I said before, the curse of the follow-up film is that when you set a pedestal so high, more often than not, you can't really match that level. And because it doesn't match that level, you can dismiss it as a bad film, but it's just the disappointment that it didn't meet that level that you're used to. And so this is something that M. Night Shyamalan had. Since he made The Sixth Sense, everyone wanted his follow-up films to be as good as The Sixth Sense, and so a lot of people dismissed him as a one-trick pony, whereas in reality, although they were good films, because they didn't match that level, you kind of distracted and you kind of thought to yourself, all right, well, they're not very good, because it didn't evoke that same emotion that you got from the first experience. And so sometimes it's almost better to start off really low, because there's only one way to go up. But definitely Kaan Evrenol set himself pretty high as far as visual surreal horror films are concerned. So I had that hesitation, but I had the excitement that this is going to be another really hellish experience. And I will say that Housewife really emulates the nightmarish experience that Baskin had, is that this hellish experience, it creates a very tight, claustrophobic, dark bubble. You want to break free of that bubble, but you just can't wake up. It's like living a nightmare, is that when you're having a nightmare, you know you're dreaming, you want to wake up, but you just can't do it. And so there's a strong level of disorientation in this film, is because the movie does take place with reality and dreams, and sometimes you don't know which is which, and so that creates that level of discomfort, is that, all right, there's no real safety barrier, where do I go? And so Kaan Evrenol does a great job at basically capturing you, and he's not going to let you go until the end credits. And so that's something that not a lot of directors can do, and that's why I'm really excited for this director, is that he can create something in atmosphere, and the atmosphere is the hardest thing to do. And so Panos Cosmatos did it fairly well in Mandy, and it has that similar atmosphere in Housewife, is that this woman, she's had a very horrible past, and that past is haunting her, and it's basically creating this really strong, vivid imagery that is basically splashed on the screen, so you can actually experience this nightmare along with her. And so when this cult leader comes into the film, I thought it was very dangerous. Basically what he was doing, you've got a lot of these cult leaders who believe that they have the answers to everything, and so you're constantly asking yourself, does he have the answers, or does he have a sinister agenda? And so that character, that complex sort of relationship, it does become a little bit more than you would first think. And then you've also got basically the inner demons of your past and how they can shape you as the future. And so all that was intertwined with the very morbid atmosphere that I thought, all right, well, this movie should have actually been a very good experience. But unfortunately, I just thought the way that Kaan Evrenol told this story was very, very confused. And that's the reason why I thought this movie was actually quite disappointing. It's not the worst film I've ever seen, but it's certainly not the levels of Baskin, because I think this movie gets lost in itself a little bit too much. Now, I thought the editing was actually quite terrible. Is that yes, the visuals are fairly good, but the continuation from one scene to another I thought was very jarring. There were some moments that happened out of nowhere that caught me by surprise, but not for the good reasons, is because I just thought, all right, well, that didn't seem right. Is that seemed a little bit cheap. Is that the editing process I thought could have been polished up a little bit more. You've also got a script that I thought really didn't work. It didn't really evolve these characters into anything that I could really connect to. And another reason why I couldn't connect to these characters is because the acting performances were terrible. And I think the reason why they were terrible is because these actors weren't speaking their native language. Now, I believe that the main character was actually a French woman, but I believe the rest are Turkish. Now, Baskin was spoken in the Turkish language with English subtitles, and that was very successful. And I know that foreign directors will actually create English language films because they wanted to appeal to people who don't like subtitles, but Baskin was very successful on its own. And so why did he have to actually use English language? And if you're going to use English language, have English native speakers actually delivering these lines, because it becomes more natural. And because it doesn't come naturally in this film, I couldn't connect to anything that was going on. And so not only do you have characters that you can't connect to, you have fairly bad editing here and there, the overall continuation of the story arc was all over the place. I get it. Yes, it's a dreamlike film. It's supposed to be very confusing, but I just thought that there was no coherency whatsoever. I kept thinking, what the hell is going on? What is this supposed to be all about? And yes, it does draw you up into your own interpretation, but you need some clues for that interpretation. Is that it just felt so random, and that stuff was happening. I thought, all right, well, there's very gratuitous violence. It's very, very heavy violence and extreme violence, which is something I liked. But there was also a sex scene that just come out of nowhere, and that's the whole problem with the film, is that things that come out of nowhere that don't really evolve the story in any way. And so I thought to myself, it's just there to splash it for cheap shock value, and that was something that was very disappointing. So I thought Baskin had a very solid idea. It was very complex, but it actually came along in the end and actually created a solid film. Whereas in this movie, it's just everything seems completely confused. I thought the director didn't know where to take this film, and at the end of the day, it does leave it open to your interpretation, but there are no clues to really create that solid interpretation and actually make you feel as though you've watched a film that was worth it. I thought the end of the movie was ridiculous, and it just, as I said, it just doesn't make sense, because I just don't think the movie had any control whatsoever. But pushing that all aside, it's not an absolute debacle. There are some things to like about it, but I definitely think it's a step way below that of Baskin, and it just becomes very disappointing. So I'm not really going to recommend this movie. As far as visuals are concerned, as far as really bizarre moments are concerned, it's an incredibly strange film, but for that, I just thought as though it needed a little bit of content to complement that bizarre imagery, like Baskin did, in order to make it a film that I was overly happy with. So overall, for Housewife, I'm only going to give this one 1.5 stars, not coming recommended. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.